Welcome, General Vi. Thank you for being with us today
Absolutely.
to talk about your insights on leadership and ethics. We have a few questions that we'll
Okay.
ask and then give you an opportunity to interject some of your own words of wisdom.
Okay.
So we'll just start off with, the broad question we like to ask everybody is, what does leadership mean to you?
Okay.
Just in a general sense.
Well, leadership to me is all about setting a vision, establishing an environment for an organization, and for the members of that organization to be able to achieve their goals and ambitions in life, and being able to provide the environment that's supportive for them to be able to reach those goals and objectives that they would like to achieve. And so to me, a leader has a responsibility to ensure that that environment is positive, that it's caring, that it's inclusive, and that it's rewarding, and that it doesn't limit someone in their ability to be able to achieve what they want to achieve, other than their God-given talents.
How long is your career?
I served 36 years.
36 years. And so now that you look back,
Sure.
how has your understanding or theory of leadership maybe evolved over your career?
Well, certainly evolved from the time I was a second lieutenant, where I was platoon leader, leading probably 30 to 40 soldiers that were in my platoon, to the end of my career, or the pinnacle of my career, where I commanded a global organization with 70,000 people from that standpoint. But even though my leadership style may have changed over time, I think it was all about focusing on the people in my organization. Always invested in people, always invested in understanding. As I said, as a lieutenant, looked my soldiers in the eye each and every day, so understood where they were, the challenges that they were facing, the type of training and development that they needed, so that we could be able to achieve the mission that we had. I think as I expanded, it was how to be able to do that at a higher scale, a larger group organization, how to message with that organization in a senior leader role. And as I continued through my career at the company level, 600 or so, to the battalion level, where we had over 1,000, and then up to brigade level, where you've got about 3,000 soldiers that you're commanding, and at that time some civilians, on up until the time that I commanded a very senior level. But I found that the requirements to be able to lead an organization are the same. And I always talk about command climate, the culture and the environment that's there, and that your soldiers, your civilians, they understand that you are committed and you genuinely care about them and the mission, that you're going to fight for the resources for them, you're going to provide them the vision and where you want them to go, and you're going to be there to support them and be on the front lines with them as you go through and accomplish that. I think that, to me, is what was critically important. So at the very senior level, as I had organizations that were throughout the United States and overseas, it required me to travel quite a bit. And I visited those organizations so that I could better understand the challenges and issues and concerns in that location where it happened to be, where when I was platoon leader, I could do that right in front of my soldiers each day in the unit. And so those pretty much stayed the same throughout.
So you mentioned that you like to look your people right in the eye.
Yes.
Would you say that you did more travel maybe than your peers for that reason, or?
I don't know if I did more than my peers. I think because I think my peers were doing the same. But I felt that you could not command at your headquarters. You had to go out and be on the ground and understand, the messaging or the guidance that you're providing at headquarters. Is it really reaching out into those formations or out to those organizations? You had to be able to articulate your message. What they may hear and see and read about coming from a headquarters is much different when the commander's on the ground. You can add that personal touch. You can answer those questions that they may have. You can make that connection with them. And they very much appreciate, because you have an opportunity for you to be real to those who may not have an opportunity to see you. And so when I commanded Army Materiel Command, I had locations in almost all 50 states. And it took me about 2 years to visit all of those locations. But it was important for me to do so because I wanted to understand and know and get to know the people who were actually doing the work, performing the mission, performing the task. It was very informative for me. I learned from that. I grew and understood the things that worked and did not work. It was not one shoe fits all. So something that may work in an overseas location may not necessarily work in Fort Hood, Texas,
Right.
or at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So it allowed me to be able to grow as a leader and have a better understanding of the guidance that I was providing, as well as with my staff and the support that they were providing to the commanders on the ground.
Where did you draw your inspiration from? Would you say that you had a model or an exemplar or maybe a couple of them that you said, I like that leadership style, or I'm going to borrow this or that tactic from?
I was very fortunate to be able to observe and work with hundreds of leaders. There were some leaders I worked with that they were born to be a leader. They had those leadership traits that they were just born with. But for the majority, you have to work at it. I don't think I was a natural born leader. And so I observed traits from very effective leaders and their leadership styles and not so effective leaders. And oftentimes I would say I learned more from the not so effective leaders of things not to do or style not to implement. But I had great mentors along the way. Probably the first was, he's now deceased, Lieutenant General Bob Gray, who was a commander of the 82nd Signal Battalion. I met him when I was a second lieutenant. He was a lieutenant colonel. And as I watched him, I said, one day I'd like to be like Colonel Gray. That was at that time. And he went on. I had the good privilege of working for General Hugh Shelton, who was the division commander, and observing him in his leadership role along the way. I was an aide-de-camp to a lieutenant general by the name of Harold Davis, and I learned from him how to treat people, his connection with people regardless of their rank. He would spend as much time and focus when he was speaking to a private and a corporal as he would if he was talking to a major general. And so I learned so much from him as well. I learned from women leaders like General Ann Dunwoody, who was just a phenomenal general officer and leader, the first woman 4-star in Department of Defense. And she just had a very effective way of being able to analyze a mission, build a team and a coalition, put some guidance in place, and just really build morale to be able to accomplish. Also learned from great soldiers, and so not all were just general officers, senior leaders. I learned from my platoon sergeant, who taught me how to become a good leader, from warrant officers who taught me about supply and logistics and maintenance. And so there were just so many that I was picking from to put in my toolkit to be able to utilize and grow as a leader and develop as a leader as I go along. What I found was common across all is, first, they were very competent in their craft and their career field. And so at every rank, I wanted to be the absolute best at that rank and that position. Didn't matter what the position was, even if it was an assignment that I didn't really desire or didn't think I desired, I wanted to be the absolute best. Commitment. You have to be committed to whatever you're doing and to the mission, to be loyal to the command and the organization. I always said you're either doing something to help the organization. If you're not, you're not adding to the organization. And then most importantly of all of those is character, integrity, trust, just upstanding, committed professionals. And so that was common across all those that I was able to serve with and observe and learn from.
So you mentioned three powerful character traits of a good leader,
Yes.
and how you observe people over the course of your career from all of your roles and
Yes.
positions. I also like the fact that you said no matter what the job or the assignment was, you
Yes.
want to be the best in that position.
Absolutely.
As you talked about the three character traits that you most valued in leaders that you observed across the board, that were common amongst the people that you served with or served under, what would you describe as your strategy for implementing those techniques? In other words, how do you get in the mindset of
Sure.
saying this or that skill is something I want to add to my
Sure.
toolkit?
Well, first, make sure you have a clear understanding of what that skill set or that style would be. You have to be yourself. You have to be genuine. You have to be authentic. And I never attempted to be someone I was not. And as I mentioned, there are natural born leaders that I would look at and admire and say, wow, I'd like to be like that person. But I understand their limits and what I'm gifted to be able to do. So one, study. Second, I would read certainly a lot about leadership and leadership style, and then practice that in just a daily, as you went about your daily tasks. Whether I had a staff, when I was a staff officer in a battalion where I had only 3 of us, 4 of us in the office, to where I've got a large group, and I would practice and see what was effective. And I would do so in different audiences, so if I happen to have a group of specialists that I'm talking to, or a private specialist I'm talking to from that standpoint, or as I became a little bit more senior, to lieutenants and captains, majors. And so I would leverage and utilize those different styles that I would see in practice until I could find my own. What worked for me, what was comfortable for me, and what seemed to be effective for me. And as I continued to rise in more senior level positions, I would emulate that. And so emulating what I saw was very, very positive. As I mentioned, some of the negative things that I witnessed as well, I was very mindful not to allow that to take place. And so I never would allow toxic leadership or toxic environments or subordinate leaders to have that kind of environment, because I knew and I learned over time that that would impede the progress of the unit and its ability to accomplish its mission. And it would lead to not having the kind of environment that I desired to have for the soldiers that I was privileged to lead.
So you talked about observing some people's whose style you would not like to
Yes.
have. You also mentioned the desire or the approach of not allowing a toxic environment.
Yes.
What would you say has been the most difficult decision you've ever had to make as a leader? And then maybe as a follow-on, what was the first issue that you ran in as a young officer?
Okay, so I'll take the second question first. The first issue I ran into as a young officer, and I came into the Army, I was commissioned in May of '80, and I was delayed entry until September. And my platoon that I had, that I was assigned at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, was in signal, and at that time our soldiers weren't, some were not of the best type of soldiers, especially that we see today. Many had come into the Army as a last resort of having done something in society and were told, you go to the Army. You've heard that before. And so I had, my first platoon was very, very challenging. And the first challenge I faced was insubordination, where there was a lack of respect for me, for my position. I was a second lieutenant, and I was a platoon leader, and I thought I was a pretty good lieutenant. And many of the soldiers were disrespectful. And I attempted to correct that through normal means of addressing what's considered to be right and wrong behavior and what's acceptable and non-acceptable behavior, and working with my platoon sergeant. But eventually we separated those soldiers out of the Army. And so I held the line to make sure that that was just not something I was going to tolerate. So that was very challenging for me. Later on, probably one of the most, and they were always challenging decisions that you have to make, and you want to make sure you're making the right decision. But probably one of the most challenging is I had to relieve a brigade commander from his position. And it was because of a toxic command climate and environment.
And in a situation like that, he's like relieved of duty and
Has to leave, well, not necessarily leave the Army, but had to leave that command.
Okay.
And so that was a very, very challenging decision. It was the right decision based upon everything that had been investigated and substantiated. But it still was very, very challenging because the impact of something like that on a unit is very difficult when the leader has to leave. And the unit continues on, of course, but that was one that I learned a lot from as well, but I felt it was the right decision at the time.
So transitioning now to something maybe a little more personal for the
Yes.
cadets, what are some mistakes perhaps that you made early on in your Army career that you learned from and that you could share with the cadets as to here's some things or pitfalls you might avoid, learn from my mistake kind of thing?
Overconfident. There's a tendency that you've done so much, especially if you've been in an ROTC program, you're graduating from a university, you happen to go on active duty, and now you have a group of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that you're responsible for. And so you can be overconfident that you certainly have your degree, you've gone through some very difficult courses and curriculum, but you don't have experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so being overconfident, you can go in and begin to make decisions and give guidance and actions without having to really have done the preparation. So overconfidence first. Take time to listen and observe before you act. There's a tendency to come in and act on something out of instinct, and it may not be the right decision. It may not be the right guidance. You may not have all the understanding of the background. I always talked about when you assume someone's position that, let's say if you have served long enough, you become the company XO or you become the company commander. And right away you want to make changes because you're the new person, and you direct changes and everyone's supporting you in implementing those changes. But then you find out a month later those probably weren't the right changes. The person before you had a plan in place, maybe because of previous guidance they had received from the higher headquarters. Example is you may want to have your staff meeting on Tuesday morning as opposed to Monday morning, and you change it to Monday morning. Change it to Tuesday morning, and all of a sudden you find out your first sergeant's not there. Why? Because the battalion command sergeant major has his or her meeting on Tuesday morning. That's why the previous person had it on Monday morning. So it's things like that is maybe take more time to observe, get a feel for the organizations. The things that need to be corrected will jump out at you right away, and you'll have time. But take time to learn, to observe, to listen, to walk around a little bit and see what are the conditions on the ground before you begin to direct and implement. Third is take time to grow and develop into a leader. And I'm not saying after you receive your commission or whether you're going into the corporate world or wherever you're going to after you have been commissioned, is take time to grow into that profession and to learn. It doesn't stop the day you receive your commission or you receive your diploma. That's just a start as you go. And the last is judiciously guard your reputation. Your reputation, when I would speak at commencement exercises, I would say, your resume will get you your first job, may land you your first job or your first position, your first assignment, but it'll be your reputation that will land you the rest. And throughout my career, I think the opportunities that I was presented, to either to serve or to be pulled into other types of organizations or opportunities that opened to me, was because of the reputation that I had of being a team player, working well with others, being able to think analytically about problems and challenges, and being able to work hard and be committed to the task at hand.
And you kind of answered already the next question that we wanted to discuss, which was advice for cadets in their leader development. You talked about, of course, observing, emulating, reading, study.
Yes.
Then you also mentioned, is there, the one thing we haven't specifically addressed is, what do you wish you knew as a college student that you know now that would have helped you better develop or more quickly develop your leadership journey?
Sure. I think to recognize, and I put it in these terms, to know when you're in the moment. There is so much that you're exposed to when you're matriculating through college or through ROTC. You're exposed to leaders at that point in time. You may not think about it. You're exposed to various conferences, things that I observe even in the time that I've been here. The investment that's made by the faculty, by the Institute itself, in the various events, is to recognize and take advantage of being in the moment, to slow down enough to take in what's all there. I think when you leave and when you depart and look back, oftentimes you may say, I wish I'd paid a little bit more attention in that particular class, or I should have attended that opportunity to hear someone talk about whatever the topic happens to be. I often remind myself when I was in the Pentagon as a major, working on what was called the Army Battle Command Systems. It was a program when we were beginning to think about digitizing the Army with all these different systems and capabilities. And I worked hard in the Pentagon in that program for about a year or so. But I remember when I left, I said, thank goodness I'm going to be away from that. I don't have to worry about that again. And lo and behold, about 5 years later, I was assigned to Fort Hood, Texas. And guess where they're filling the first Army Battle Command Systems? And I found out their 3rd Corps was going to be the first unit in the 4th Infantry Division to field the Army Battle Command Systems. And while I did certainly work hard in that position, I found myself saying, I wish I'd taken a little bit more time to learn about those programs, and because I'm on the receiving end of it now. And so I would say just, again, recognize the opportunity to leverage the people that you have available to you in this type of environment. Slow down enough to be able to realize and enjoy the moment that you're in. Recognize that it's a tremendous opportunity. It's a unique opportunity. It's truly a leadership laboratory. And you learn so much. It provides a great foundation for you so that when you do go out into, whether you're commissioned or whether you go out into your career field, you are very well prepared for the start of the journey. And I'll always emphasize the start. You really have just gotten a foundation, and be humble enough to be able to go out and know that there's much more you have to learn to develop and grow and to be successful.
So you talked about, what I'm hearing you say is you observe people, getting your feet wet basically in the organization, enjoying where you are. I think it sounds like observing and getting information from your surroundings, understanding the environment seems to be sort of essential.
Yes.
Wherever you're transitioning.
Wherever.
So one of the classes wanted to know, what role then does diligence and discipline play in improving yourself and others around you?
Yeah. Well, I in any career field profession, you have to be diligent in what you're doing. You have to be committed, and you have to dedicate yourself. And so the discipline part that comes into that is that allows you to make sure you maintain focus on what you're attempting to do and what you're attempting to achieve. There are always going to be distractors out there. You've always got to balance. That'll get worse when you leave a structured environment. When you have a structured environment, you know point A, point B, what time, and that's pretty much laid out for you. But when you leave here, and when you leave college, and you're at that first assignment, or you're at the basic course, basic officer course, or you're at that first job that you're going to, the discipline to be able to commit yourself to learning about this new profession that you're going into, and build that competence that you need, because competence will build your confidence in what you're doing. And once you have the confidence, then of course you're going to be recognized and noticed as a contributing member of the team. And so I found that every position that I moved to, from the time I was commissioned, every assignment, I had to have the discipline to learn about that new position and become very good at it. Understand the right questions to ask, the right data to look at, and to be able to develop a strategy or plan and be able to have the discipline to execute that plan. And so I think that's where that comes into play. And so the discipline here, I think I was speaking to a cadet about uniforms. But the discipline on paying attention to uniform is small things matter. And paying attention to details oftentimes is the difference between success and failure. And so discipline has a critical role into that, and it will for the rest of your life.
How did your position or outlook change after the U.S. began to withdraw troops and minimize their presence in Iraq?
Okay. Well, I think part of this, where we found some challenges in leadership, is that leading in a combat area of operation and conducting operations there, which is a different environment than when you come back to a garrison environment. And so here you've been accustomed to being deployed downrange. You conduct, and you're given a task, say, to conduct a weapons range or firing range. Where there are tasks that are different when you're in a garrison environment, how you handle the weapons, ammunition, again, attention to detail, task conditions and standards that you have to follow in protocols. And so I think that's a change, as we've had less and less now. At the end of combat operations in Iraq, we're still conducting course operations in Afghanistan and other parts of the Middle East and other contingencies around the world. But it is a different environment in a garrison environment. So how do you sustain that? How do you maintain that level of readiness, the standards of discipline that you must have in place to continue to have a safe environment for our soldiers and civilians to be able to operate in? So I've seen some of those changes take place. I'm not certain that gets to the question that you're asking, but I've seen that as part of the challenges of adjusting to a different leadership environment than one where you're forward deployed with troops in a particular combat zone, and when you're back in a garrison environment or a standard training environment that has different conditions and the way that you have to operate.
Okay. Do you have any other thoughts regarding, what maybe a cadet would need to hear about, good advice or words of wisdom?
I'll just close and just say that, I think reputation is key and essential. Reputation, relationships, investing in people, ensuring every member of the team is allowed to be a contributing member of the team. Work hard to guard your reputation. Integrity is your watchword. It has to be. Trust is the foundation of leadership. when you depart and you commission or you move out into another career field, it's no longer about you. It's about the people that you're entrusted to lead and to serve with. And so take time to get to know those that you serve with. You never know the impact you could have on someone's life. You may not see it manifest itself for years in the future, but you never know the impact that you have. And remember the three points I made about competence, commitment, and character. And character being the most important, to maintain that in mind at all times, because character is who you are and what you believe in. And to continue to nurture and develop that character as you go along in your career, I think is critically important for you to be very successful in whatever endeavor that you choose.
Absolutely.